The exchange variation of the QGD with c takes, e takes, and then 5, bishop g5. This is the opening that Arjun Erigaisi just busted out versus Magnus Carlsen in round 10 of the 2025 Norway Chess Tournament. This opening was incredible. The game was insane, as was the insane mating attack that Magnus launched at the very end of the game. You don't want to miss how the GOAT attacked Arjun in this game. All right, let's go back to the very beginning here. In the game, Arjun opening 1 d4, black goes d5, and Arjun goes c4. The strongest move here, the good old-fashioned Queen's Gambit. Now here, black has a few different ideas. e6, c6, and d takes c4 are the strongest moves for black. And in the game, the GOAT goes e6, the Queen's Gambit declined. Now in response, Arjun, he goes for the most ambitious way to play against this opening. He goes knight c3 first, black goes knight f6, the typical move, and now Arjun takes on d5 like this. Black takes back with the e-pawn. That is the standard response. And now finally, bishop g5. This is the exchange variation of the QGD, and this is the real starting point of this opening. Now, this is known as the Carlsbad pawn structure. Here, white does not have the c-pawn, and black does not have the e-pawn, and the ideas here for both sides are absolutely fascinating. Both sides can attack on any side of the board. White, for example, can go a4, b4, b5, but black can also go c6, b5, a5, and then b4. And beyond that, both sides can also attack on the king side or in the center. All right, from here, Magnus, he continues. Bishop e7, blocking the pin of the bishop on g5, a solid idea. And here Arjun goes e3, setting up bishop to d3 ideas. That is the ideal square for the light squared bishop. Now here, Magnus, he castles, short castles, a typical move. Arjun goes bishop d3, the standard move here. And here, black goes h6, driving back the bishop. It goes to h4, and then finally c6. Now here, Arjun, he shows his hand. He shows the key idea he wants to go for in this game. Arjun has many options. You can go queen c2 and long castles. You can also go knight f3, potentially intending knight e5 and f4. But Arjun goes for the strongest and most ambitious plan in this game, and that starts with the move knight g to e2 like this. All right, this is the key line in this entire opening, and Arjun, his idea in this game is going to include short castles and then f3 and e4. This is why you put the knight on e2 in this line. You leave the f-pawn free to move, and white's idea, again, is f3, e4, and if he can get the idea in, e5, and then launching an all-out attack on the king side. The plan is very, very strong. Black, of course, has many different ways to defend against it, but overall, this is the strongest way to play this line as white. All right, Magnus, he continues. Knight bd7, a typical square for the knight in this opening, and of course, the bishop on c8 right now is temporarily locked out of the game. However, in the long run, black should be able to find a decent square for that piece. Now Arjun, he castles. That is the standard move here. And black has a lot of different ideas here. He's castled, his knights are out, his bishop's out, and it's time for Magnus to find some sort of plan. Now, typically in this opening, when you go h6 like this, driving back this bishop, that move is typically paired with a move like knight to h5 or knight to e4, trying to trade off these bishops right here. Now, instead of that, Magnus goes for a completely different idea. He expands on the queen side with the move a5. Now, this move is very strong. It's a typical idea. First of all, you gain space. Second of all, you make it way harder for white to ever achieve a b4 advance, and that b4 advance is one of white's key ideas in this opening. And finally, black is setting up the idea of b5, then b4 like this, gaining space and driving back this knight on c3. All right, Arjun, how does he respond? Well, the main move here for white is queen to c2. That is perhaps the most flexible move here, but instead, Arjun, he goes for the immediate f3. This guy is ready for a fight. He wants to go e4 effectively as fast as he can. But Magnus here, he's also ready, and he plays the move b5. So this is a very telling move. Black here is getting ready to meet the move e4 with the move b4. What is the idea behind that? It's simple. When you go e4, this pawn is super vulnerable, and it's really only being supported by this bishop, this knight, and this f-pawn. Now, when white goes e4, black is ready to go b4, driving away one of the key defenders of that square, that being the knight on c3. So black here is completely ready to meet e4 with b4 at a moment's notice at any point in this opening or this middle game. All right, from here, Arjun, queen to c2 is played. That is the best square for the queen. There are a lot of lines where white may actually insert the check on h7, hitting the king. So the queen on c2, that is the best square. It's right where it belongs, and it also has some pressure on this pawn on c6. Now, normally that pawn is supported by a pawn on b7, but here the pawn is a little bit vulnerable. All right, in the game, black, rook to e8 is the move. Black slides the rook over like this. And then here, Arjun, quick opening lesson here. Typically, when you play this opening as white with this f3, e3, intending e4 idea, typically you want to play at least 2, if not 3 preparatory moves before going e4. Those moves are, you typically go rook a d1 and king to h1 first, and you may even also go bishop f2 and knight to g3 before going e4. But these first 2 moves, king to h1 and rook a d1, are so important. If you don't play those moves, you can run into a lot of problems. Now here, Arjun, he actually just goes e4 right away without playing either of these moves. Now, was this a bluff? Was it a surprise move? Was he trying to throw the goat off guard? What is the idea behind this move? I don't know. If I had to guess, I think Arjun is just going for the most aggressive option possible while also trying to have that little bit of shock value in this opening. All right, now, Magnus, how does he respond? Well, of course, the idea of b5 was to go b4 in response to e4, and black does play that here. So b4 is the move driving back this knight. Where is the knight going to go? It goes to the a4 square. That is the best square for the knight. It does eye the c5 square and so on. And of course, the queen now on c2 is targeting the undefended pawn on c6. That is a very important detail. Now, Magnus, how does he respond? Well, first of all, he takes on e4. D takes e4. That is part of the idea of b4. Again, trying to weaken this square right here. White takes back with the f pawn like this. And here, Magnus, he goes for a really crazy tactical idea that leads to absolutely insane complications. Now, if you like puzzles, pause the video and try to find the idea that the goat went for right here in this position. Again, it leads to absolutely insane complications. Here, Magnus, he goes for the move, knight takes e4. Okay, let's slow down. What is going on here? Did black just give up this piece for free? No, he did not, because he opened up the discovered attack on this bishop on h4. So, for example, if white takes on e4, that would be a massive mistake. Black simply takes back on h4, and black here has temporarily won the pawn, and he also has pressure on the bishop and the knight on the e4 and e2 squares, and black overall is doing outstanding. So that is not a good idea at all. Beyond that, what can white do? Well, Arjun, again, as usual, he goes for maybe the most complicated way to play this position. He takes on e7, like this, attacks the queen. Of course, black has to respond. He takes back with the queen, queen takes, and here Arjun, he spots this free pawn on c6. And in this position, Arjun spends roughly 18 minutes on this one move. Keep in mind, Arjun, he has 2 hours to make literally all of the moves in this game. There is no extra time at move 40. He's got 2 hours, and that is it for literally all of his moves. And he spends 18 minutes in this position, and he decides, you know what? We are taking this pawn on c6. Here we go. All right, first of all, obviously, the threat is taking on a8. And you cannot move the bishop, as if you go to b7, the queen takes it, or a6, the queen here, or sorry, the bishop takes it on a6. So here, black, he's got to find some way to deal with the threat of queen takes a8 without moving this bishop. And what is it going to be? Well, here, Magnus, he has a couple of good ideas. The strongest idea involves actually giving up this rook and moving this knight and opening up the idea of queen to e3, hitting the king on the g1 square, as well as the bishop on d3. So the strongest way to do it involves knight d2. You move the knight right here, again, setting up the idea of queen to e3, targeting the king on g1, as well as this bishop. Now, instead of that, in the game, Magnus, he goes knight e to f6, going back with the knight. Also a decent idea, again, opening up the idea of queen to e3, forking the king on g1, as well as the bishop on d3. However, the knight on f6, it's a little bit more passive than it would be on d2, and for that reason, Arjun is getting a slightly better version of that same idea. Now here, Arjun, he's all in. He takes the rook. Queen takes a8. Now, temporarily, Arjun is up the rook. Of course, black is going to fly in to the e3 square, and here Magnus spends literally like 5 seconds on this move. Almost no time at all. He flies in, queen to e3. There's simply nothing else to consider. So, the queen, it hits the king on g1 as well as the bishop on d3. The king has to move somewhere. It goes to the h1 square, and now the queen does take on d3 like this. Now here, white goes knight to f4. The knight jumps up and targets the queen on d3. The queen's got to go somewhere. Where is it going to go? Well, here, the queen takes on d4. Queen takes d4. So black is getting the minor piece, that being the bishop, plus the pawn for the rook. And beyond that, black is also very, very active. Most of his pieces are on good squares, including the queen, the rook, the knight, and so on. All right, Arjun, how does he proceed? He starts with a very obvious move, rook a d1. And by the way, guys, this game does show why king to h1 and rook a d1 are so important for white in this opening before you go e4. I mean, white is basically going king h1 and rook a d1 anyways, and it was a little better earlier in the opening to play those before the e4 break. Just a tip in case you play this line as white, as I personally do. All right. Black here, the queen, it's under attack. It's got to go somewhere. In the game, queen to e5 is the move. The queen slides back. Now here, white goes rook to c1, sliding the rook over again and targeting the very weak bishop on c8. Now, very importantly, this bishop, it cannot go anywhere. If it goes to b7, the queen takes it. If it goes to a6, again, the queen takes it. So with that in mind, how do you defend this bishop? It's actually not easy. I mean, the queen really can't defend it. Neither can these knights. If you go, say, knight b6, you just take the knight and white wins. So black here, black is actually losing this bishop literally no matter what. So what the heck is Magnus doing? What is his idea? Well, here, he slides back with this knight, knight to f8. And you may be wondering, okay, why did he do that? Isn't he just losing this bishop? The answer is yes, but he has a key idea. Here, Arjun, he takes on c8. Rook takes c8 is the move, but Magnus finds the key response to save the game. Queen takes f4. Magnus spending literally 6 seconds on this move. What is the idea? Well, the queen is under attack, but if you take the queen, you get checkmated by rook e1, rook to f1, rook takes f1, and that would be checkmate. Now, beyond that, of course, the queen is also targeting the rook. So you can't move the rook, you can't take on f4, but the rook is also under attack. So what do you do here as white? Well, Arjun, he finds maybe the best move here. Queen to a6. The queen drops back to a6 and defends f1. Therefore, now the queen is legitimately under attack because if you ignore the attack, white takes on f4, and if rook e1, the rook slides back to f1 and white does defend. So white here will defend against the idea. All right, black, what's it going to be? Here, Magnus goes for an incredibly combative idea. Personally, I would never, ever play this in a million years as black, but Magnus here, you know, he's the GOAT for a reason, and he goes for it. Queen takes f1. He simply gives up the queen on the f1 square, and what does he get in return? Well, he gets the one rook and the other rook on the c8 square. So we have queen takes, and then rook takes c8. Magnus here giving up the queen for 2 rooks. Now, personally, I would never do this in a million years. Every time I try to play this way, giving up the queen for 2 rooks, literally 100% of the time, I lose the game. I'm just so bad with the rooks versus the queen. But Magnus here, he decides this is by far his best option. All right, Arjun, it's his turn to move. Obviously, there's going to be many back-rank mating threats with the move rook c1. For example, if you move the queen almost anywhere, like f4 or f5, for example, rook c1 will lead to checkmate. Therefore, Arjun, he goes h3, giving his king some extra space on h2 to retreat to if it needs it later in the game. Now, Magnus, he slides over. Rook d8, a solid move. We have queen to a6, targeting a5, and we're starting to see the problem with defending against the queen. The queen, it can zip around all over the board and target anything at once, and it's actually very hard for the opponent to properly defend everything. Magnus here, he likely needs to find some way to position all of his pieces where they all defend each other all the time. In other words, Magnus here, he needs some sort of fortress where everything is defended. If he can achieve that, he'll have decent chances. But if he doesn't achieve that, white here is going to clean up with the very active queen. All right, Magnus, the move is rook d5. That rook's on a perfect square. It supports a5. It's also being supported by the other knight like this, so black getting a mini fortress already. Now, we have knight b6, attacking the rook, rook to c5, and then knight to c4. Arjun, he drops back, guards the open c file, and also pressures a6. A very good multi-purpose move. Now here, Magnus, the worst placed piece for him is this knight on f8. This knight has to get into the game sooner or later. Now here, according to the engine, knight g6 is the best move, but instead knight e6 was played in the game by the GOAT. Now we have knight takes a5, winning the free pawn. And here, Magnus, I mean, it looks like he's simply losing the game. Let's do inventory. White here has the queen versus the rook and the knight, and the queen is simply a lot stronger. Beyond that, white also has the 2 versus 1 pawn majority on the queen side, and white's plan is simple. Win this pawn, and then push these pawns down the board and promote. And it's a very simple but very difficult idea to stop. So, Magnus, what is his idea? How is he going to stop this idea by Arjun? Well, Magnus finds an absolutely unbelievable idea to attack the white king. And it all starts with the move g5. Magnus, he's literally intending g4 with a mating attack against the white king. Let's see how it goes. Arjun, knight c4, trying to centralize his knight, getting his knight off the rim where it was very dim. But now, Magnus, g4, the pawn advances one step further. Arjun, b3, defends the knight, but here black takes on h3 like this, g takes, and then rook to h5, targeting the weak pawn on h3. And how is white going to defend? Well, here, for reasons that are very, very complicated, the best move for white is king to g2. The point being, after king g2, if black ever goes knight g5, targeting this pawn, if black takes on h3, it will not come with check. That is the key idea. Instead, in the game, Arjun goes king to h2, and this move is substantially weaker. The problem is if black ever goes knight g5, threatening rook takes h3, the rook attack would come with check against the king, and black would get an extra tempo for free. All right, from here, Magnus, the best move is knight g5, but instead, king g7 was chosen. Now we have queen b7, and then finally, knight g5, threatening the pawn on h3. All right, Arjun, knight d6 is the move, trying to attack f7, but here black simply takes on h3 like this. Rook takes h3 is the move, the king slides over, and then Magnus, rook d3, a very strong fork, forking the knight on d6, as well as the square d2, and if black plays rook d2, he's forking the king on g2, as well as the pawn on a2. So Magnus here finding the absolute best square for his rook, where it's very, very active. All right, Arjun, knight f5, hits the king, king g6, knight e7, and now Magnus, he does not go back. If he goes back to g7, white goes here, black goes here, white goes here, black goes there. Which square is it? There. And either way, it's a draw on the spot. Instead, Magnus here, he goes king to h5, and this is the real beginning of his insane idea. He's going to march the king down the board along with these two knights and the rook and try to checkmate the white king despite not having a queen. It's absolutely insane, but in the game, it works out unbelievably well. All right, Arjun, he spots the free pawn on b4. He takes the free pawn, but it turns out this move is at least a little bit of a mistake. And for reasons that are simply beyond my understanding, queen to b5, instead of taking the pawn, is the stronger idea. Instead, here, Arjun, he takes on b4, and Magnus, he shows the idea. Knight f to e4. The knight jumps in. It's being supported by this knight, and now black threatens rook d2, where the rook is defended by the knight on e4. So black is going for this incredible fortress where literally every piece is defending every other piece. All right, we have king f1, and then rook d2, again the fortress. The rook defended by the knight. The knights also supporting each other. The knight's also supporting the pawn on f7. Almost everything here is being supported by everything else, and that means the queen cannot zip around and start picking off free pieces. All right, we have queen b5, Arjun trying to defend here, but now rook d1 hits the king, king g2, rook d2, king f1, and now king to g4. The king is a fighting piece in the game. All right, queen to f5 hits the king, king g3, queen to e5 again hits the king, king to f3. Now queen f5, king g3, queen e5, king f3, queen f5, and here king g3 would be a draw on the spot. Instead, Magnus here, he's playing for a win, and he goes king to e3, keeping the game alive. Now here, white, knight d5 hits the king, and Magnus finds again the strongest move, king d4, putting pressure on this knight. All right, here Arjun, king to e1 is the move, pressuring the rook, and here black simply takes on a2, rook takes a2 is the move. Now we have queen to d7, the queen slides back, rook to a1 hits the king, king to e2, rook a2, king to e1, and here, believe it or not, if Magnus wants it, he can still play on for a win. And the way to do that starts with the move knight to c5, hitting the queen, intending knight to e6, defending this knight. That would be the way to play on. But instead here, Magnus, he just goes for the draw. He has 35 seconds left. You can't blame him. And he simply plays the move rook a1, king e2, rook a2, king e1. And here, both sides agree to a draw on the spot. Wow, what an insane game between Arjun Erigaisi, the Indian prodigy, and Magnus, the GOAT, the guy who may or may not be quitting classical chess. We'll have to wait and see what he wants to do about that. But overall, a really fascinating game, starting with the key move by Arjun that lit up the board, e4, leading to absolutely insane complications. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed the video. Comment down below what you thought of this game. Are you guys Arjun fans or Magnus fans or both? Let me know down below. And if you want to support the channel, go ahead and smash that YouTube like button. Just smash it. It helps these videos reach way more people. And as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And I'll see you in the next video.